All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. Today, timely, my friends, we are going to talk about U.S. politics and preparedness. What does this election mean? Now, you probably might listen to this after or before the election. It doesn't matter. These are influential parts of preparedness. So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at her. I thought I'd use that intermission there between the two speaking parts to just a little piano versus the normal action drum beat because we want to just calm things down a little bit. We're talking about U.S. politics today. We're talking about the U.S. election. We're talking about what that means for you, preparedness, and the world around you, and how does that going to fuel what you're going to look at just for this short period. But if you're listening to this podcast a month after the U.S. election, 2 months after the U.S. elections, what we talk about here is still very much applicable because that's the context, but this is the discussion about politics and preparedness, the intersection of them, and what it means. But first, we want to thank everybody for continuing to drop your comments out at www.insidemycanoehead.ca, the good Canadian, non-apologetic, but sorry. We appreciate it. Good, bad, or indifferent. Keep them coming. This podcast is our absolutely, unquestionably free service to you. I make zero revenue at all. It costs me a little bit of money. It doesn't matter. I love spending the money for that. And it's our ability to spread the word of preparedness in a logical, rational format that helps people rock an incredible life, chase their dreams, but wrap it in a blanket of insulation for these pretty chaotic times. Now, if the 2020s is continuing to throw you from a loop, then this is the way it is. It's not changing. The 2020s are not going to become less disruptive. In fact, our argument is that this is probably predictive of what the next decade or two are going to look like. I'm not certain 2 decades out, but I'm fairly certain we could push this conversation to the mid-2030s that this is what a chaotic world looks like, or what a normal world looks like, that chaos is normalized. We're going back to the struggle of nations. We're going back to political statesmanship, or the lack of statesmen, and we'll get into that. We've got a lot of possible issues that are coming down the pipe. The U.S. election just happens to be the next one on the plate. Very influential, very important. And if you don't understand the importance of the U.S. being a superpower or how we stumbled into this world that calls the U.S. a superpower and why it sits where it does, there's a great book called The Accidental Superpower by Peter Zeihan. And he writes a lot like Ray Dalio and Ian Bremner, but he really gets to the heart of why the United States of America emerged from the Second World War the way it did, what America did as a nation after that, how the Cold War was waged by the United States of America as the head of NATO and basically the superpower against the Soviet Union, and then how has the world been shaped post fall of the Soviet Union. So it's a really great book that gives you the understanding and the framework to know why the world looks the way it does now, right? And I'll say this 100 times over. Nobody cares whether you like it or not. Really, one of the key tenets of preparedness is understanding the difference between the normative and the positive discussion points. It's more of a lens, let's call it that. Do you look at the world as it is, understand it as it is, and figure out how to navigate it? Or do you look through the lens of what you want the world to be like, right? I wish the world was this. I think this is what should be real. I think this is fair. Those type of people are expending a great deal of energy wishing for something that doesn't exist and is largely beyond their control. The reality of the world is what it is, but understanding why the United States is positioned where it is in global economic and politics, and understanding where the other nations of the world fit. And I say that because this podcast is downloaded in 61 nations around the world, including the Russian Federation. Everybody has a different worldview. Understanding why the world looks the way it does is critical for understanding whether your preparedness plan and your ideas that you have for how you want to live your life are grounded in reality, are grounded into what is likely to occur, are grounded in a threat profile that you understand, so that when you roll your world back, you can say to yourself, hey, I'm built this preparedness plan in a Cold War environment, but the Cold War environment doesn't exist. We have a different environment. Does my preparedness plan make sense? And the reason I say that is I always talk about in my writing, and we're over on Substack now. It's, again, another free charge. So what we really try to do here is I'm over under Substack under my name, Jeff Donaldson. If you look that up, or at Preparedness Labs, on Substack, you'll see our writing. So we offer all our free writing there. We offer all our free information on the podcast. So whether you like to consume preparedness information in the written form, or whether you like to find it in the oral form in the podcast, we're going to provide both. They don't necessarily come out at the exact same time, but everything that I talk about in the podcast ends up in a written article. And what I talk about on the podcast might have been based on a previous written article. So we offer those mediums free of charge. And next week, or later this week, and really, getting into the mid of November, we're going to start doing it in the visual medium. So we've got a YouTube channel. There's 105 subscribers. The podcast goes up there as an audio only. I've got a few shorts and other videos that I do. But really what we're going to move out to is we're going to start producing 1 or 2 quality YouTube videos a week, 2 quality podcast episodes a week, and 2 to 3 written articles a week. And basically, we're going to provide the preparedness information on open source medium, whether you like to consume it in the oral, the visual, or the written word. Now, the politics is important because we always have position, and I position and I base this off well over a decade of research and academic experience in the preparedness world, is that you face political, economic, cultural, and familial threats, okay, or hazards. Yes, there are the series of natural hazards, right? Those are the 5 main hazards. And I say that because I have said in the past that the traditional framework for preparedness is against natural hazards. So the realization of a natural hazard, so an earthquake, a tsunami, a tornado, a wildfire, a flood, those are your traditional preparedness. That's against a natural hazard. That is 20% of preparedness. The other 80% of preparedness is being ready to navigate political crisis, economic crisis, cultural crisis, and familial crisis. And natural. You put those together, there are 5. They're each worth about 20%. So you can see how preparedness is far, far more than just getting ready for a wildfire or a flood, etc. When you adopt a prepared life, you're looking at a frame saying, okay, I want to be ready for the natural hazards. Very important foundation. We always start there. Then we open the door and talk about political hazards, cultural hazards, economic hazards, familial hazards. This podcast today is talking about the political hazards that are present in your world. Now, the importance of understanding why the United States of America is in the position it is as a superpower, then when you understand that and why it's doing what it's doing and why it has the power it does, now you understand the importance of the U.S. election. Now, understanding the division of power in the United States of America is important too. They have a very unique structure. There's no other country on the face of this earth that has their governance structured the way the U.S. government does. You can call it brilliant. You can call it ridiculous. You can bemoan the Electoral College or whatever you want. Again, nobody cares what your opinion is on all of that. The reality is the U.S. president wields a certain amount of power that is exponentially influential in comparison to any other world leader. President Macron of France can stand up and get angry. The world kind of looks a little bit, and a few local French interests will be a bit concerned. But when the U.S. president stands up and gets really angry, the world stops and pays attention, because what could come next because of the reach of the U.S. government through both its economic power, which is being challenged by BRICS right now, but it remains the dominant economic power when it comes to the use of the U.S. currency, and their military. So they have an exponential ability in comparison to every other country on this world to reach out and touch someone. Ask the Houthi rebels. Well, you can't ask the ones that were in the bunkers that were hit by the B-2 stealth bomber. I mean, whatever you think of that, that's just an example to hoist aboard that if you mess with the U.S. government and they can frame you as an enemy, something is coming for you that nobody else on the face of this earth can do. Again, I don't care whether you agree with it. I don't care whether you should think. Nobody cares what each one of us think. The point is that this is the world. So understanding that, understanding the importance of the U.S. election, and understanding whether it's the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, far less the personalities involved. Some people get bent out of shape about the personalities of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Have your day. I mean, I don't care. I really don't. It's the policy. I'm a policy nerd. My PhD is in public policy, okay? So I'm a policy nerd, and I look and I judge political events based upon their policy implementation. So the policy is how a government changes the rules of the game. That's an important thing about politics. You have decided, and if you listen to a previous podcast episode that we did on the American Dream and how the American Dream has changed and it looks completely different, and if you're chasing the old one with the white picket fence, you've set yourself and your family up for failure. If you're pursuing the new one, then you know it is based upon a global environment. Not globalism, because that's dead, but a global environment. Understanding the influence of the U.S. presidential election and the influence of the U.S. politics on the way the world economy functions directly impacts how you intend to do your business. You have to have an eye on the political masters that control the rules of the game. The rules of the game in politics are what matters. The reason why billionaires and multimillionaires enter politics is power, because that kind of power doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. But the principle, people call it the power, and they say it's just drunk power. You're partially right, but the real power is in the rules. And I'll give you an example. Here in Canada, we used to have a Canadian Minister of Finance who left a family business making tens of millions of dollars a year. He was worth hundreds of millions from his portfolio. And he takes a $200,000 a year job as a member of parliament. He becomes the Minister of Finance. He becomes the individual responsible for the rules of the game that his multi-$100 million family business invested in. He gets to go in there, and to this day we believe, but we don't have certainty, that the individual was successful in changing a lot of the internal rules to set his family and his business up for greater success. I don't know if that's true. There's lots of accusations out there. I have no evidence one way or another. But that's why the wealthy get into politics, because it's how you change the rules of the game, right? Because as certain celebrities are finding out right now, when you cross the U.S. District Attorney in racketeering and economic crimes, you're done. That's how Al Capone went down. That's how the big fish go down, right? Because you break the rules of the game. You break the rules of how the economy works, how businesses operate, and how we interact. When you break those rules, the U.S. government will take you down. If you don't like those rules, you can fund a government through donations that will change those rules, or you yourself can enter politics knowing that you will be anointed to a position where you have access to regulatory authority. I'm not talking about changing legislation in governments. I'm talking about the access to the regulatory framework that backs it up. So from a public policy nerd, there are three levels, right? You have the legislative authority. That's the legislation that your House of Representatives or your Parliament passes, right? It's the big law. So-and-so act gets royal assent, or the president signs it and it becomes law, right? What most legislation contains is an authority matrix. The authority matrix is your regulatory framework. So it'll say, it establishes a ministry, and the ministry has the authority to make regulations in this field, and that regulatory authority rests with the minister. And I'll give you a Canadian example here, right? So in the field of emergency management in the province of Ontario, there is a law that passed that gives the minister regulatory authority, the Ontario minister, provincial state minister, same as you would have in the United States of America, gives them regulatory authority. What that means is the minister can then make regulatory changes without having to change the law. That allows government to function far faster, because in reality, it's probably close to 5 years to change a law. If you actually need to go back to Parliament and change the law, you're probably looking at 5 years. So what laws do that are on the books is basically establish positions, give an overarching intent, and then what they do is they provide minister regulatory authority. The regulatory authority, then the minister can make the rules and change the rules and then publish them. So at the Canadian federal level, we have something called the Canada Gazette. If you're a Canadian citizen and you've never read this thing, Google it, right? Because every time the federal government changes a federal government regulation, they are required to publish it in the Canadian Gazette. Right? They have to publish it. That's their official way of notifying the Canadian population that there is an upcoming regulatory change to one of the rules of the game. 99.95% of the Canadian population probably doesn't even know this document, this newsletter exists, or where to find it. But that's how the government's telling you it's changing the rules. There are usually committees, maybe there's not committees, but the minister has it. This is the reason why powerful people on the business and industrial complex go into politics to get into that minister's position, to then go in and change the regulatory framework to make the rules far more friendlier to their businesses, right? So that's why politics is so important. And because the U.S. political system right now controls the U.S., is based in the U.S. dollar, which for now is the world's default fiat currency, which means if you want to buy anything around the world and goods are exchanged, they're exchanged in U.S. dollars, which means access to the U.S. dollar system requires approval from the U.S. government, which is why U.S. government sanctions are so effective right now around the world and so punishing to countries like Iran, for example. Iran can't get access to the SWIFT system, which is the U.S. banking system. The worldwide banking system that's grounded in the U.S. currency is called SWIFT. To get access to SWIFT, you need permission from the U.S. government. That allows you to go in, to buy U.S. money, to trade, and then sell U.S. dollars. So if you think about how something works. So if I'm a Canadian and I want to buy a product off America, right? I just use my credit card, it converts the currency, nobody cares, right? But in reality, what has to happen is I have to first go buy U.S. dollars at whatever the rate is. Then I take those U.S. dollars and I go buy the U.S. product, right? That's the transaction that the bank does on your behalf or the credit card company does on your behalf that you don't really see. But that's really what has to happen. I have to buy the local currency that the item is sold in. Why this is important is the SWIFT system denies access to that step of getting U.S. dollars. That's the power of the U.S. government. That's the power of the U.S. economy right now on the globe, is they can deny people access to that or limit access to certain people under sanctions, causing significant economic harm. This is what the BRICS group is trying to counter. The BRICS group, if you don't know, is made up of the country acronym BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South America. And they've just recently, 20, 30, 40 other countries are trying to join the BRICS. But basically, they're trying to create an alternate payment system that allows countries to sell goods and services to each other without having need access to the U.S. dollar. as BRICS becomes more powerful and more used, the American ability to input economic sanctions starts to go away. So, for example, if a country like Iran chooses to move 100% to the BRICS format and is able to buy everything they need from the BRICS format, then the U.S. no longer has the ability to put a sanction on Iran because they don't use the American dollar and they don't use the SWIFT system. So go ahead, take away from me what I don't have. You have no sanctions ability, right? That's the danger imposed, which is why the American government works so hard to protect their economic influence. Now, this is where your economic collapse comes from, because there are some people out there who argue, and I'm not an expert in the U.S. economy, so I'm going to say this right up front. There are some very prominent people that argue the only thing holding America at the top of the superpower is the use of the U.S. currency around the world. Because as soon as people don't need the U.S. dollar to trades in goods and services, then the U.S. dollar collapses as the holder of value. And at that point, the over-leveraged U.S. economy and your massive deficits and debt is going to come home to roost. Now, whatever. The point is the American president's and Congress's job is to protect American interests around the world, which means they need to keep people on the SWIFT system and using the U.S. dollar, and they will need to keep their foes grounded, shall we say, and a little busy. So the point being is understanding why the U.S. system is where it is, understanding what the principal interests of the U.S. system are, is incredibly important when you sit down and you think, okay, I run in the as our previous episode talked about the new American dream. I'm in the modern knowledge economy, right? So I'm out there earning income in the modern knowledge economy. I'm doing a global service. I'm selling an online service or online goods or whatever to 4 or 5 different countries around the world. I'm exposed to international politics. You're going to say to yourself, but how many people do that? A huge new part of Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and the tail end of the millennials are really understanding that this knowledge economy is the new American dream. And so they're out there rocking it. So it's very, very influential. And so understanding that means now just as preparedness talks about protecting your economy if you get fired, right? The trifecta of preparedness plans that we teach at Inside My Canoe Head and Preparedness Labs Incorporated talks about the third one being the need to protect your income, because losing your primary income of your family on a moment's notice, I would argue, is just as impactful as your house burning down. You need to have a plan for when you get fired. So when you walk into work tomorrow morning and your job fires you, or your boss fires you and you lose your job, you need to know right now exactly what it is you're going to do, how you're going to pivot, what job you're going to get, what education, like all of that needs to be planned out. Doesn't cost any money, but that's the plan. If you're in the modern economy and you run a service or good-based interest, or you work inside of a business that does that, okay, so you're not the founder, you're not the CEO, you didn't create it, but you work in the gig economy, which means you have very little security of income. So if you have a salary job, the likelihood that you'll have that same job in a year is fairly low. So you're very transient. So you need to understand the world that you're in and the politics that you're in and how the U.S. government affects that, right? The same thing as you would is if you're a European, and we've got a number of listeners in France and Germany, and when you think about you are inside the the European economic model. Now, again, I'm not an expert in the European economic model, but that's the world in which you live. That's the world in which you operate. So you better darn well know it well, know the rules, know what you can do, know what you can't do, and know, because you know that, you're then able to exploit the regulatory frameworks that do exist to be successful. Again, whether you're the director of accounting, the director of logistics, whether you're a supply chain management demand analyst, or you're a company CEO, you all work in some format in an economic environment. save those few that work in non-economic, politically charged environments. Like if you're a Class A mechanic, right? People's cars are going to need to get fixed whether the economy goes up or down, left or right. Your job is to stay at the cutting edge of what the car industry is doing and what that looks like. But for the majority of people, as we stay in this knowledge economy and it becomes more and more pervasive in how we earn our incomes, we more and more expose our lives to political upheaval. Let's be clear. My hopes for November 5th, and if you're listening to this after November 5th, you can tell me whether I was successful or not. My hopes for the world and for the United States of America is that whatever occurs is exponentially clear. That country, God love them, and I went to war a couple of times alongside American soldiers, and I think they're fantastic, wonderful people. You need a landslide. I mean, everybody has an opinion what side it is, but let's be clear. You need a landslide victory. So the shenanigans that everybody gets up to on both sides, ballot boxes showing up at 3:00 in the morning, whether they're stuffed full of Republican or stuff like all of that shenanigans needs to not be able to make a difference, because the American public's opinion is so resounding in one direction versus the other that the world just can STFU and get on with it, right? Because whether Kamala Harris is the president or Donald Trump is the president, the sun will rise the next day. In January, February, March, April, all of 2025, the sun will come up, the sun will go down. The world economy will turn on. There will be wars and conflict. There will be a whole bunch of things going on. I just need that to be clear so that we have certainty in the superpower, because uncertainty and chaos in the superpower has such a cascading effect simply because of what the United States of America is and where it sits in the global world. There is a cascading set of consequences that come out of instability and a lack of clarity in the U.S. political system. Happy you don't like it. I'm a Canadian. I do my best to leave politics off of this podcast. We have a situation where we have a very unpopular government. We're going to have an election in the next year. Some want it tomorrow. Some think we should delay it. I don't care what anybody thinks. I just know that the result of the next election in Canada, for the very same purposes for our little world, needs to be consequential, just like the UK did in the last election. The Labour Party absolutely steamrolled the Conservatives. I don't care what side of that you're on, but it was crystal clear what the people of the UK wanted, right? And the key with voting is I get a say. I don't get the last say, right? My vote counts because I cast it. I don't get the say. So I have to accept whoever won. It doesn't matter whether it's my person or not. It doesn't matter whether it's my team, whether it's Team Jeff or Team something else. It doesn't matter. I have to accept because I got to get on with it. The idea of preparedness is that you are sitting down, looking down the barrel of a potentially disruptive year in the United States of America. If that election is contested, which means it's on the borderline, it's very, very close. There are late night recounts in several counties. You know what I'm talking about when that electoral college is bouncing around 270 on either side. If we live in that world, the world is going to be very chaotic. What does that look like for you? Now, for some of you in very stable, comfortable lives, likely not much other than what's going to get you fired up and cheesed off about either whether you call her a crazy lady or crazy orange-haired man, whatever your viewpoint is. It's going to be chaotic. Now, it may not be impactful to you, but this is the time where you need to sit back and look at your exposure to areas that are influenced directly by who wins the U.S. election, what chaos in the U.S. government looks like, and how would that influence your current position. If you trade in the United States of America and you trade in a field that is going to be subject to tariffs, And the Republicans have been clear that they're going to put significant tariffs up as a way of increasing government revenue. And you import from another country to the United States of America, you need to have a plan right now for when the Republicans win, Donald Trump becomes the president, and in March and April, these tariffs go in, and your ability to execute your job just got punched upside the head by something you didn't control, right? The same thing is on the Democratic side. If certain Democratic policies are going to challenge how you do business, for example, if you are a firearms business that is not, and you manufacture bump stocks in the United States of America, and Kamala Harris is going to be president with a landslide and control of the Congress, you're going to have significant impacts on your business. Your question is, I don't care if you're angry about that or not. Nobody does. My question is, are you prepared to have that significant impact on your business? If you run an automotive parts supply business that works across the borders in North America, because as a Canadian, there's nothing more intricated or nothing more complicated, shall we say, than the automotive industry in Canada between the parts. And, you know, sometimes car parts in a car can go back and forth a dozen times across borders between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico before it's finally assembled. The Republicans have said they're going to renegotiate and reopen the certain sections of NAFTA. Here we go. We've always said the Canadians is like a mouse in bed with an elephant, right? We can argue, but we really don't have an economic position to argue against the Americans. They can just stomp us out in a heartbeat, right? So are you ready in your parts business to be ready for that? You see, what I'm trying to say is just bad man, bad lady is a very narrow, superficial look at the U.S. political situation. The reality is somebody's going to win on November 5th. Somebody's going to get sworn in January, and somebody's going to start policy in February, March, and April. How are you ready for where that goes? Are you ready to navigate that world? Now, one other viewpoint before we close. What if you want to exploit that? What if you want to take advantage of that? If you're in the modern economy and the gig economy, to be successful means you need to be at the leading edge of change, which means as new ideas and initiatives come into your niche business, you need to be the leading force of change and not a follower if you want to exploit an opportunity, right? And exploiting an opportunity is not bad. It's what business does. So you want to look at the U.S. election. You want to look if Donald Trump wins and the Republicans take control of Congress, what does that look like for opportunities? What doors is that going to open for you? Same thing if Kamala Harris wins and the Democrats win the Congress, what opportunities does that open for you? How can you leverage that change of government, that change of focus? And they're two juxtaposed positions on where they're going with the U.S. economy and the U.S. global position. And so you need to be ready to exploit the opportunities that are going to come flying out of left field in January, February, March. I mean, forget who wins. Take your political positions aside and dump them. I don't care. Nobody cares about your feelings and whether your butt will be hurt if somebody wins. This is about if you're in business, if you run a business or you're involved in a business and you have a senior role, how do you exploit the opportunities that are going to be presented when the U.S. makes a political decision, right? How are you going to get ahead of that curve? What's that going to look like? And how do you position yourself now at the end of October to exploit the opportunities you know are coming in March of 2025? That's how you be successful. And when you wrap your world in a blanket of preparedness, when you insulate your ability to suffer shocks, you're able to lean forward into March of 2025 with an investment in a potential exponential gain, right? You're able to do that because that blanket of preparedness that you've insulated around your income, around your personal self, around your family, and around the hazards that you face. When you do that, when you create that preparedness plan, that protects you against most of the effects of exogenous shock, and it allows you to reach out and do something pretty incredible. And that's the power of preparedness, my friends. Listen, I wish my dear friends in the United States of America the best of luck. I worry about your country, not because it goes left or not because it goes right. It's because some of you might not accept the fact that it goes left or it goes right, and you're becoming polarized. And whether you agree with the figure Charlie Kirk or not, and whatever you think of him, one point he's making in his conversations is correct. When we stop having discourse, when we stop sitting down and having conversations with people we disagree with about important points of the day, we start to let violence happen. We start to see people with an opposing view as enemies. When we do that, we lose control of our society and we open it up for violence. So let's learn something from this experience and realize that it's perfectly fine to have difference of opinions. I lost a couple of friends when I went out and I thought Donald Trump did a reasonably good job of being U.S. president. I had a couple of good friends I had for years just walked away and stopped talking to me because of that. So let's set the world where we can disagree or agree on certain important topics of the day, whether they be even the ones you're not supposed to talk about. The fact that we are able to sit around a table, virtual or otherwise, and debate, discuss, and respect, and have a conversation where I'm not trying to win, I'm just trying to make my point heard. That we both walk away learning a little bit more about the others, that it's not about winning the debate, it's about being able to logically present your position and the analysis and discuss. And remember, when you're having a debate with somebody, when they're speaking, you should be listening to learn, not listening to win. Because if you paid attention a couple of podcast episodes, I talked about my favorite psychology course of how to win an argument and how to defeat somebody else's argument, irrespective of how powerfully they held it. It requires you to listen. And if you're just trying to use your talking points to defeat somebody else's talking points, I guarantee you, you will be unsuccessful 100% of the time. That's not how human debate works. So, again, I wish my sincere best for my friends in the United States of America. I will be watching, I will be worrying, and I will be hoping again for, like I said before, an absolute, unquestionable, one-sided landslide so we can just get on with it and get on with the next 4 years and keep somewhat stability in the governance of the United States of America. So this is Politics and Preparedness. Thanks again. I appreciate you taking your time to join us here at Inside My Canoe Head. And remember, keep dropping all of your comments. We love to hear your comments, good, bad, or indifferent. Go over to our website. There's a contact us link at the bottom with my email address on it. And remember, this podcast is free. It will always be free. And it is here to serve you, provide free preparedness education. And I would ask that if you do one thing for us is to share this podcast with somebody else if you found it interesting. It's free of charge. So is our information over on Substack under Jeff Donaldson at Preparedness Labs. And so is our upcoming modernization, shall we call it, of our YouTube channel. We're coming at you across 3 channels: video, audio, and the written. Whatever your preferred medium is, our message is clear. Adopting a prepared life provides you the ability to rock your dreams, chase an incredible life, and have a wonderful experience while you're a little speck of dust on a rock hurtling through the universe at 25 miles an hour. Take care and stay safe.